I mean, so many startups right now, have values somewhere up on their wall and post them on LinkedIn, blah, blah, blah. But I bet you a little amount of founders, if you would walk up to them now and ask them what their values are, would be able to state them.
This episode is brought to you by WHU, the Otto Beisheim School of Management. WHU is reshaping the way students learn about business, management, finance, and entrepreneurship through its innovative programs and partnerships in Germany and across the globe. To learn more about this globally ranked university, visit whu.edu today.
Hi folks, Dries here. Welcome to the newest episode of the Most Awesome Founder podcast. Today, I'm happy to introduce to you WHU alum and serial entrepreneur Moritz Weisbrodt. Together with his compagnon de route, Gabriel Tomala, Moritz founded in 2016 Kaya Health, offering AI-assisted digital therapies via a mobile app for chronic pain. In 2020, Moritz and Gabriel started a new adventure, creating the company Alaiko, which is a fulfillment as a service platform for SMEs. At the beginning of this year, Alaiko announced the closing of a $30 million Series A round with notable investors such as Next47 and Tiger Global Management. We are looking forward to hear the story of Moritz, and we hope you will enjoy the show.
Coming to you from WHU on the banks of the Rhine River in beautiful Vallendar, Germany. This is the best and most awesome founder podcast. A show about entrepreneurs, innovators, advisors, and educators, and the stories that make them who they are today.
Moritz, welcome and great to have you here on the Most Awesome Founder podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Great. And as always, we want to start with some personal storytelling. So I want to actually give you the floor and maybe tell us a bit about your entrepreneurial trajectory that you already had behind you, because I think that's quite an exciting trajectory to talk about.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned already, so I got a rather boring background in business and management, if you want to say so. And same for my co-founder. Yeah, so both of us studied Joke Society, which we're really proud of at WHU, of course. Me doing my bachelor's and my master's there. Gabriel just his bachelor's, and then sometimes for 2 years our careers kind of like have separated. He was focusing a bit more on the product and tech side of things, and then after these 2 years, our journey came back together as both of us started working at Rocket Internet back then, scaling a food delivery company, and that's how we really got in touch with entrepreneurship for almost the first time. And so up until then, I really thought that my career would completely go into a different direction. And we've been on that entrepreneurial career path ever since. So up until today, we have founded 3 companies. One of them, as you already mentioned, Kaya Health, which is a digital therapeutics company. With this one, we went down the typical fundraising roadmap from pre-seed VCs up until Series C. Yeah. And then after that, parallel to that, we founded a direct-to-consumer e-commerce business. So comparable, a much smaller business. I think 10 people working there as of now. And that's how we got in touch with e-commerce and then logistics. Also how the idea of Alaiko was born, which we've been operating now on for more than 2.5 years. So founded that in April 2020, and as you said, recently raised our Series A. So it's been a fun and a bunch full of learning so far.
Yeah, and I think if you look at that journey, it's clear that you're quite a risk taker, not? It's starting new companies from scratch, even in different industries. And I'm always interested to actually find out, is there something in your childhood that already gave a strong indication that you would become this risk taker? Is there any story you can tell about how in your childhood maybe already the scene was set to become this serial entrepreneur, heavy risk taker, or not?
I think it's kind of like hard to pinpoint it down to one event. But what I would say is that I've been and still are super curious, and I get easily fascinated by completely different topics. And so this really led from me changing my hobbies back then on like a yearly basis towards also moving a bit into my high school as well as university years. So doing like completely different internships, and really from banking to startups to large corporates to small companies. And so it's really about trying out and understanding how things work. That's what I'm really fascinated by. And also a big fan of documentations on a side note. So if you would put me in front of a TV teaching me how, I don't know, how a car works and why a plane flies, that's how you get my interest. And I think that really also shows when you look into the different companies that we've been working on. So I think what's important to mention, and what's kind of like the thing that they have in common, is that within the founder circle, we have always experienced one of the problems that we're trying to solve quite closely. So back at Rocket Internet, for example, Foodora especially sparked my interest because I was fully in on the value proposition of having delicious food delivered to your home instead of not so nice dishes. When it comes to Kaya, one of our co-founders was suffering from chronic back pain back then. So he had to undergo physiotherapy offline once a week, Thursday. I mean, you know it probably. 3 p.m. How are you going to do that if you have a job? And back then, many of us were doing and engaging a lot in these fitness online exercise tools like Freeletics, for example. And then we kind of like thought, okay, why not combine both of it together? And then during Kaya, I was in negotiations with the NHS in England. So I was traveling a lot back and forth, and getting healthy food was really a problem for me. And the UK supermarkets were much more developed, so they had these nice juices and healthy shots, and we didn't have them in Germany back then. And that's how the idea of the direct-to-consumer e-commerce business was born, where we are selling ginger shots. And then while scaling that business, we obviously had to get in touch with logistics. We changed the logistic provider 3 times. And once again, like really saw a big potential of how automation and tech could change an industry for the better. And that's how we now switch to fulfillment.
And if I listen to your story, I think it's quite fair to say that I would kind of classify you as a generalist, somebody that can easily jump from one setting to the other, apply some core principles, but still feels comfortable moving from one way to another. And actually, a question that I often get from my students is, should we try to become a specialist in something, or should we try to create a broad profile? So you seem to be in favor of the broad profile, if I see it like that.
I think it can be perceived that way, but maybe like speaking a bit of departments, so and maybe also tailoring my answer to the case of Gabriel and me. So we are super complementary to each other, not just when it comes to interest. So he's, as I said, really on the product and tech side of things, and I always had everything that's commercially related to be in favor for me, and also from a personality type of things, we are quite a complementary setup. So I'm basically much more the communicator and like to engage with people and be on selling events, and that's also where I would describe my main strengths around. So I think one part of being a good founder, or at least a personality type that you should have in your founding team, someone who's able to sell and to excite and to tell a vision. Be pioneering, because you won't only need that for new hires or for getting new partners on board or for selling to new customers, but also to eventually fundraise. And so I'm totally on board with you on I do have a general role, but I think what we became really good at is really getting to the core of problems. So really like that problem solution skill set is something that we've been able to double down on quite heavily, and then you kind of like become industry agnostic, because you just focus on how to improve things for the better, and as long as you do that closely related to the customers, and ideally even having been in a position where you have experienced that problem by yourself, I think that makes it really easy to develop a great solution.
Yeah, so you're actually aiming, you can develop some skills that you can actually easily then apply in different industries, because although it's very different industries, the core principles are often quite the same in the end. Yeah. Okay, makes sense. Now, and again, you have a very fascinating kind of trajectory, having created companies in different settings. Now, at least that's what I teach to my students, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think these trajectories are always a roller coaster. So there are highlights, but there are also moments that it's getting very tough and might be very stressful. And of course, typically in podcasts, we tend to focus on the highlights, but I think it's also nice if you can share with us some examples of moments where maybe it was more stressful, more challenging, and how you dealt with these kind of challenges.
Absolutely. And happy to, because that's how you learn eventually. So maybe we categorize them a bit into the 0 to 1 stage and the growth stage, and because I think also your role as a founder changes quite tremendously between these stages, and it never stops changing. So I think one of the big learnings that we made from the first company was that you almost have to get uncomfortably close to your target audience and to the problem that you're trying to solve. Because that will eventually also make you become more convinced. It's hard to convince others if you haven't managed to convince yourself first. So it's a lot about how do you build up the courage, how do you build up the conviction, and you do that simply by validating. So it's quite a logical process. So setting up hypotheses, validating them. So how do you validate? You need proof. How do you collect proof? Not sitting at the home office table by your own. So you have to get out. You have to get out of the building and talk to potential customers, investors, partners about your idea. And you can do that. Like in the beginning, we always thought, okay, we need at least something to show them. We need an MVP, blah, blah, blah. And we were trying to build that on our own in our apartment first, which is completely not true. Just use mock-ups and get out there and get some data. I think that's something that we have adapted over time, and really changed our way of thinking around that quite heavily. And even nowadays within Alaiko, as we're launching new products, new services, and it's not us doing it anymore, but entrepreneurs that we get on board. So entrepreneur in resident roles, for example, it's we try to teach them this a lot. So why are you here in the office? and
you should be talking with our customers, not
absolutely. And I think that changes obviously over time, because as your role changes a lot. And I think one thing that we also had to learn was that it's definitely it could be the case that your ideal customer profile, so your ICP, the person or the company you're selling to in a B2B case, might change over time. And that's something that we, for example, didn't experience that lot or that often in the past companies, but had to experience now at Alaiko. So as our software side of our offering was developing quite fast, the ability of what an e-commerce merchant could do while using the Alaiko software has grown to a degree which has a lot to do with automation. So initially we thought we were selling to smaller e-commerce merchants, but in a small shop, there's not much to automate. Yeah. And if you compare an e-commerce shop that already has 60 employees and is getting hundreds and hundreds of emails saying, where's my parcel? I want to change an address. I want to return something. When do I get my refund? Blah, blah, blah. So this is something where we had to acknowledge, okay, so our software is really pulling us into a different segment here. And we need to be flexible and adapt because a different target segment will change so much in your organization. From who are the people selling to these prospects? How is communication and messaging looking like? Will the website change? The materials, the processes? And that's something that we kind of like had to learn, and was a challenge back then, because it also led to personnel changes, which are always tough. So I think that's one thing. Then something where I'm super proud of when I look now at Alaiko, but was also like a learning we kind of like had to undergo through in the past, was the importance of culture and values. Because if you are a small company, you can be, or you can at least try to be everywhere, every time. And that will heavily change as soon as you scale. And now within these 2.5 years, we've ramped up. So taking any personnel that is in the warehouses out of the equation, and we've now ramped up to 120 FTEs across 5 different locations. And that does something to an organization, and it does something to culture. It's a super emotional topic for me, because I put so much work into it, and I know how to get a lot out of it. But it requires hard work to not just recruit the right people, but also develop the right people into becoming culture ambassadors. And make sure that your company values, your leadership principles are being passed on. Because at some point in time, you obviously cannot be anywhere anymore. Everywhere anymore.
And can you maybe explain a bit more how you're trying to do that? Because I think this is a very fascinating topic. And I think today we hear about things like quiet quitting, that people no longer want to do kind of the additional mile for their company, that because of virtual work, it's much more difficult to build a culture in companies. So how are you trying to address that topic? How are you trying to make sure that employees really function as a cultural ambassador for Alaiko?
So maybe once again, trying to split the advice for someone who's just starting and where the company might be bigger already. So I think culture is something that will not develop by itself. Culture is something that you need to make your mind up about before you start hiring the first person. And this is something that we really had to learn in the past. And which we now applied at Alaiko. So me and my co-founder, before hiring the first employee, sat down on a table. We did like not just, so many startups right now, have values somewhere up on their wall and post them on LinkedIn, blah, blah, blah. But I bet you a little amount of founders, if you would walk up to them now and ask them what their values are, would be able to state them.
So let me first ask, what are your values?
So for us, we have 4 company values in total. And we kind of like categorize them into one core value, and then 3 additional values. And the core value that we have at Alaiko is heartiness, because again, circling around the question, what kind of company do you want to build? You have to ask yourself, is it the I'm like exaggerating now, but is it like the soulless company that is just numbers driven and output oriented? Or do you actually want to build something sustainable, where you won't find quiet quitters, where you will work with people that you look forward to seeing in the morning when you walk into the office, where you find people that having fully vested their equity packages tell you, I want another one, I want 4 more years, I want to stay here beyond that. So I think that is something that you really have to make your mind up about. So what kind of company you want to build, and we did that prior to our first hire, and it circled really around meaningful connections and heartiness. Then the second thing is something that I see in a lot of companies being stated as a value, but I do not see it lived there, and that's the topic of ownership. So I think you have to be fine with things not going 100% your way.
Okay.
And if someone is able to do something 80% the way you like it, in terms of how to scale yourself, you should probably be able to delegate it and let go. And what we also had to learn in the past, that the topic of ownership is something that you need in order to attract the right talent. Otherwise, you will just have people who are waiting for orders. But that's not how you scale a company successfully. So that's also something, a value that we've been thinking about a lot. Then the third value that we have is how to create win-win-win outcomes. So especially in the context of Alaiko, as we not just have the e-commerce shop, but also the people shopping online, and then you have last mile carriers like DHL, UPS, DPD, Hermes. You got warehouse sites. You got inbound carriers like Kühne-Nagel, DB Schenker. So it's logistics is quite complex, but you can even scale it down to basically any inner department situation. You will find little tasks or little situations where just 2 stakeholders are involved. And if there are appearingly just 2 stakeholders involved, there will be second order effects on other stakeholders that you might not be thinking of in the beginning. So for us, it's really important to get people on board who I don't like the term, but like kind of like think outside the box and think beyond the stakeholders that they have right in front of them, to create a win-win-win outcome. Because that's also something which I perceive to really be counting in on the sustainability aspect of company building, because only a situation where every partner wins is a situation that is long lasting. And then the last and fourth value is chasing progress, and so circling a lot around challenging the status quo. And I think it has a lot to do with also like our entrepreneurial career so far, because we've been jumping back and forth between different industries, and never took anything for granted. And even though people were saying, oh, we always did it that way, and that's probably a good sign that you should do it differently now. So these are the 4 values. So it's meaningful connections and heartiness, ownership, win-win-win outcomes, and chasing progress. And we really managed to kind of like make up our mind about that from early on. And then specifically, you have to be specifically hard about who are your first hires, because they will have a major impact on culture. They will have proven a major impact on financial performance in the end. And that's something that we've been quite good at, I think. And now jumping a bit into the later stage of a company. So how do you get new joiners up to speed on that? So for us, even though we do a lot of remote hires, we have quite intensive onboarding weeks here on site in Munich, in our headquarters. So even the people that we now hired in the UK, for example, we have them fly over, spend 2 weeks with us. And a lot of that onboarding is, yes, partially circling around how's Alaiko working, blah, blah, blah. But a big portion is exactly circling around that. And it's there's always some secret sauce to it. So thinking back of my time at WHU, there were multiple times where I asked myself, so what is different in the administration process? How do they select students where I like to spend time with 99% of the people that are in my class? So it's also a lot about who do you put in charge to select the right people? How do you establish hiring committees? And then maybe on a last advice learning that is really specifically tailored to the recruiting process. So up until today, we still have founder interviews in place. So there's not a single person in the company that we haven't seen prior to joining. It's small conversations, little like 30 minutes slots, and they mainly focus around two topics. One is cultural fit, but that's not something that I test in sort of, these are my 3 cultural fit questions. That's rather something that comes throughout the conversation while discussing about the second topic, and that is expectation management. So my most favorite question is what has been sold to you so far? Pitch me the role that we're sitting here about together, and I think that's how you can have an impact and make a difference.
Yeah, and I think it's very intriguing that you to this heartiness as a kind of core value, because to be honest, as an outsider, I would not quickly link the logistical industry with the concept of heartiness, which I think is also then challenging for you, because it's not only you recruiting people that fit with the values, but you also need to attract people that can represent that value. So how can you make sure that in that kind of industry that is typically seen as a kind of a hardcore rational industry where it's all about maximization of efficiency, that you can attract people that have kind of this feeling for the hardiness core value that you want to really have in your company? How do you do that?
So maybe splitting between inbound and outbound. So outbound, our talent acquisition team, I think, again, it's been really about who do you put into these seats? And are they able to spot that sense quite quickly in first conversations? And when it comes to inbound or advertising or recruiting events, we are using it quite dominantly in our communication. So you will find videos on our job platform where people that have been working here now for almost as long as we're working on Alaiko will tell you what it means and why it makes a difference. So it's I'm totally with you. It's not common, and you have to educate about it. But finding the people where this mindset matches, you're getting so much out of it.
Okay. And how do you deal with that today? Because of course, I remember I looked at the press releases when the 30 million Series A round was announced beginning of this year. And almost all of these press releases started like e-commerce is booming and the fulfillment companies are the ones that are the shovels for the gold diggers, that kind of story. I think quite quickly the story has changed. I think today not a lot of people will say that e-commerce is booming. And, I don't want to go into the financials and stuff like that, but it's more about how in this kind of, I suppose, more challenging period in time, how are you able to kind of keep up this culture of heartiness, whereas I can imagine that you need to make difficult decisions nowadays.
So it's really, I think it has a lot to do with the level of empathy that you have when you talk to partners. So it could be partners on the logistics side who need to raise prices. It could be partners on the shop side where not just recent economic changes, but also technical changes like an iOS update, which made it quite heavy to advertise online. Is basically applying pressure from both sides. And I think being right in the middle of that situation provides you with the ability to help both parties at the same time. So when I'm kind of like referring a bit to the value proposition of Alaiko, you can really split it into two parts. One, and that is extremely logistics / automation related, is circling around cost saving. So many e-commerce brands, and maybe before we jump into that, on a side note, so with Alaiko we are targeting larger e-commerce brands. So it's not the small Shopify merchant that has just started out. It's rather the e-commerce business that is already generating 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million in revenue per year. And that's kind of like slightly a different segment. But anyways, it's two segments of the value proposition. One is really circling around automation and via automation, cost saving, improving your fully loaded costs. I think this is kind of like where the business education was helpful. So to also use empathy to change perception. So engage in customer conversations and tell them, so hey, people, we've been operating a D2C business ourselves, or still somehow are, and we know the situation you're in, but we also know, and we see it with other customers, how you can turn that situation into one that is maybe even a bit profitable for you, because all the end consumers are aware that the prices are rising. So it's not going to be you raising your prices currently and everyone's going to be angry about it. And it's a common thing that pricing and price increases are being passed along the value chain, which of course has an impact on end customer budgets in the end. But that's something where we can also educate the e-commerce shop owners not to be 100% afraid of. It also, again, depends on the industry that they're in. But if you're selling a cosmetic product that already comes with a basket value of 90, 100 euros, people are not going to be caring that much if it's now 92 or 96. So there are ways to kind of like pass that down the line where we help. And I think empathy and heartiness is helping in that manner. And that's value proposition one. And then value proposition part two is circling a lot around how can we not just save costs, but help the shops make more money. How can we increase conversion rates? How can we bring up customer retention? How can we increase brand ratings, for example? And we've done that again by using tech. One really vivid examples are tracking pages. So if you are shopping something online and an e-commerce shop provides you with a link, and that link is sending you to DHL, UPS, where you as an end customer have to type in your code, which you don't have at hand, and once you typed it in, you are somewhere lost on the page, and you don't even know what kind of parcel is this actually, because I've ordered 3 different shops. So it's not a nice experience, and we are building personalized tracking pages. So you, for example, would get a different tracking page based on whether you are a first-time customer or whether you are a recurring customer, whether you are sitting in France or in Germany or in the UK, whether your basket value is 60, 100 or 150 euros. And we're kind of like changing the post-purchase experience really to a way where you can get much more out of the customers that you have already acquired, which in the end has a really positive impact on customer retention. And there again, it was empathy and heartiness helping us to understand the situation that they're in, and also convincing them that, hey, we are not just your fulfillment provider. We're not just the ones building the shovel for you to make more money, but we want to help you in doing that. And we see a lot of great ideas in other e-commerce businesses. So why not share that, create some sort of community? So where tricks are being passed along. So it's and that's working quite well for us.
So it's a bit like we see the empathy, the hardiness as a kind of foundation that helps us to bring our value proposition to the customers. And is that also how you want to differentiate yourself from the competition? Because of course, this is a field where there are quite some competitors, or should I see that in a different way?
I think you can see it that way, even though I haven't proactively phrased it that way in the past. But I think that the putting yourself into the shoes of the customer ability, being obsessed about being uncomfortably close to your audience, is something that helps us to stay a bit more innovative compared to our competition. And I think that's something that has helped us in the past and still helps us in winning deals. That from an outside perspective, you can say there are many logistic and fulfillment companies out there, but the difference really comes to light once you engage into a product demo and really understand the full load of value that has that is the product provided by the software.
Yeah. Can you explain a bit how you really do that? Because of course, I think almost every fulfillment company will say we are customer centric and we take customer first principles and we will get close to you as much as possible. So in terms of the message, I think still everybody gives the same message, but so how can you actually convince your customer that you are really different in that way, that you really take it seriously?
It actually has something to do with the model. So if you look into that fulfillment logistics space there, you can categorize them on an x-axis, let's say, where you have asset heavy on the left and asset light on the right. So asset heavy being companies that are operating and owning warehouse sites completely on their own, which I do not think is a super smart idea, because as a startup, you're probably not the best person and entity to know how to run a warehouse. And on the asset light category, on the very far end, you will find players that are set out to integrate into many different fulfillment providers, which means many different API integrations, which means the more players you have, it comes with some sort of overhead on the one hand, and on the other hand, it comes with a less deeper technical integration. And what we have built at Alaiko is a hybrid model, which means that we've been scanning the market for quite some time. I think I've visited 42 warehouses on site, and we've been really trying to find which are the AAA warehouses, state-of-the-art logistics that are already fulfilling for direct-to-consumer e-commerce businesses. So we stumbled across companies that have the largest D2C brands you would know, and in the DACH as well as the European region, and then kind of like engaged in some sort of a hybrid operating model where we have dedicated warehouse sites. So it feels like it's our warehouse. And the benefit is we are still asset light, but we have an influence on processes, hardware, software that's being used. We have people on the ground, but not the full workforce, but rather just the white collar workers that are in charge of the processes. And that's something that we haven't seen out there. So some players are trying to copy it now and are moving into that direction, which is flattering. But I think that's always the case. And I think also from a business finance perspective, the topic of capital allocation is really important here, because the asset light category asset heavy category will invest and needs to invest heavily in assets, which means that yes, they own the processes because they own the warehouse, but we also own the processes and can use our full funding to invest that into software development. So I think the level of and the amount of focus that lands initially on how much do we speak to our customers and what kind of features are we able to be developing at the same time, is fundamentally based on the business model somehow. I hope that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And you clearly illustrate how actually different companies can take very different choices, and how you have taken kind of the bold choice to be in the middle. That's a bit, not completely to the left, not to the right, but try to combine a bit best of both worlds in that way. Yeah, interesting. Okay, maybe to kind of move a bit to the end, let me take or ask a broader question. So as mentioned, you were actually at Idea Lab last week in Wallander with the WHU students. I hope that was a bit of nostalgia for you. But if you need to give some advice to these students about, if you look back at your career and they ask you for, in general, some advice, what they should do with their career, what would be your advice for them? Or maybe what would you do different that you have done before?
So obviously one of the advices now has to circle around heartiness.
Yes.
And I think I'm going to start with that. So the team and the culture is the heart of the company. Yeah. So the saying culture eats strategy for breakfast, blah, 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 is actually true. Yeah. So if you are able to invest, and by invest, I do not mean financially, in building a strong company culture from day one. And if you are able to kind of like also use that mindset when it comes to assessing the right candidates and assessing them based on cultural fit, that is an investment that will pay off heavily. And I think one guiding question that really helps here is also circling around asking yourself whether you want to spend at least during the period that you're working in that company, whether you want to spend a huge portion of your life with that person, and whether you could picture yourself on the one hand celebrating wins together, and on the other hand going through the downs of that roller coaster ride you just described. I think a second one, I would circle it a lot around the aspect of leadership and trust. Maybe you have heard of the pyramid of team dysfunctions by Patrick Lencioni.
Okay,
it's a super great model because he managed to prove that the results and the outcome, so the output of a team, is proven to be connected to the trust that you provide that team with. So trust being a product of credibility, of reliability, of empathy, of intimacy. Investing in these relationships, investing in building trust, not being afraid of letting go, has a direct impact on the results. And I know from also like a lot of angel investments that it is a hard thing for a founder to let go, because it's kind of like your baby, and then that's something that you just have to learn. And then the last advice I would say is invest in your personal development, because your role is changing so fast, and also in terms of how to develop colleagues. It doesn't always have to be like this super expensive leadership coach. It could start as simply as following key opinion leaders in your industry, listening to talks. So there are little mistakes that haven't been done by someone else in the past, and trying to find mentors and learn from best practices. So that's something I would probably circle this whole thing around.
So you can learn from the failure of others. That's what you're saying. Great. And maybe related to that, as a last question, do you have any specific recommendations for books or podcasts that our audience should listen to, that you are really enthusiastic about?
I would probably limit it to two. So the first one is The Score Takes Care of Itself, by Billy Walsh. You know this one?
No.
So it's a football trainer, former football trainer, that has taken on the I think the worst performing football team in the NFL league back then. And this concept really circles, and then he has transformed that knowledge, and he led them to winning the Super Bowl. So it's a great story. Good to read. Circles a lot around how to not be too much distracted by what is going on the left and the right. So the score takes care of itself. Focus on what you're good at. Focus on solving the problem. Focus on the customer, and the results will follow. That's recommendation one. And then recommendation two, is probably never split the difference, negotiate as if your life would depend on it, which is a book written by a former FBI hostage negotiator. And he also, after making like a super great career in the FBI, transformed into the business world. So he's been hired many times by large corporations, and they're using them for negotiations, M&A deals, etc. And it provides you, I think I read it 4 or 5 times. It provides you with a really great tool set. So it's one of the books where you can say, oh, I'll use this, I'll use this, I'll use that, of how to negotiate with people, which again is, as I was telling earlier, almost as important as the selling part of it. So probably.
Can you give one example of a tool that you learned from the book and that you use in your negotiations?
It's so one concept. Maybe it sounds a bit like stating the obvious, but one concept is really circling around making the other person being really transparent about the position that you are in. So trying to pull the other person into your shoes. So and say, look, these are the options that I have. This is the I don't know, the price range we're looking at. I'm trying to be super transparent here with you. And you got to put yourself in my shoes now, blah 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 blah. So and it's really, many of the concepts are really tangible. And I adapted using them, and it works.
Perfect. Yeah, very interesting. I'm already intrigued to read that book now. Yes. Moritz, I was not expecting that we would discuss like half of the time about culture with somebody that founded a logistics company, but actually I think it was very nice to hear how you're trying to establish that culture, what you're doing to do so, how it helps you to differentiate from customers. I think that's very valuable insights for our listeners. So I would like to thank you for openly sharing these insights. And I hope you also enjoyed a bit of talk. And to our listeners, I hope you also enjoyed listening to this podcast, that you learned something from it. And hopefully we hear you again next time.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.